The Counterfeit Shema. The smell of hazelnut coffee and the soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the comfortable living room as David adjusted his study notes. The 6 people gathered around the large sectional sofa were completely relaxed, kicking off their shoes and resting well-worn Bibles on their laps. There was an easy, earned trust in the room, built over years of shared meals and deep conversations. "All right, guys, we finally made it," David said, leaning forward with a warm smile that put everyone at ease. Revelation chapter 13. We're about to hit the verses everyone always wants to jump to, specifically regarding the mark of the beast. As soon as David finished reading the verses about the mandatory mark on the right hand or the forehead, the room shifted from quiet focus to eager chatter, everyone tossing out the theories they had picked up over the years. "It's got to be an injectable microchip or an RFID tag embedded under the skin," Tyler asserted, leaning forward with absolute certainty. Chloe chimed in immediately. "Or maybe it's some kind of digital currency app, or a biometric retinal scan required to log into your bank account." Sam shook his head, laughing lightly. "I always thought it was more like a barcode or a mandatory government passport that locks you out of society if you don't comply with the system." From the corner of the sofa, Arthur cleared his throat, his wife Helen nodding beside him as he traced his finger over his open Bible. "You know, reading this just makes me think of the Passover," Arthur said softly, looking up at David. Helen added, "Yes, remember how God told the Israelites to put the blood of the lamb on their doorposts so the destroyer would pass over them? It feels like the same idea, a physical mark that separates one group from another, even if this beast version is a dark twist on it." David smiled, nodding appreciatively at the older couple's intuition. "Arthur, Helen, you guys just hit on something massive, and it's actually the perfect doorway into how we should study this," David explained, setting his coffee down on the side table. In music, specifically in grand operas, composers use something called a leitmotif. It's a recurring musical phrase associated with a specific character, place, or idea, and every time it plays throughout the performance, it evolves to tell you more about the story. The Bible does the exact same thing with themes. Instead of pulling Revelation 13 out of thin air and guessing about modern technology, we need to trace the leitmotif of the mark from the very beginning of the scriptural symphony to see what it actually means. The group quieted down, intrigued by the concept, as David instructed them to flip all the way back to the opening movements of the Bible. The very first time a mark appears in Scripture is Genesis chapter 4, with Cain, David said, waiting for the rustle of pages to stop. Rachel blinked in surprise. "Wait, wasn't Cain's mark a curse for killing his brother?" David shook his head. "Actually, no. The Hebrew word is oth, which means a sign or a banner. Cain was terrified that people would hunt him down in vengeance, so God set a mark on him as a divine decree of protection." From note 1, the leitmotif establishes that a mark placed on the body functions as a boundary line that warns away judgment. David waved his hand toward Arthur and Helen, steering the melody into the next movement of the theme. Which brings us right back to what Arthur and Helen noticed in Exodus 12. The blood on the doorposts using a bunch of hyssop wasn't just a random ritual. It was a physical, architectural boundary marking the household as God's territory. And it doesn't stop there. Think about Joshua chapter 2, when Rahab saves the Israelites' spies in Jericho. They tell her to tie a scarlet cord in her window, so her household will be insulated from the coming destruction. It's the exact same note playing again. Vivid red markers on structural openings, defining a space of absolute safety amid a systemic collapse. "But God didn't want the mark to just stay on the outside of their houses," David continued, gesturing for them to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. In the Shema, the core confession of Israel's faith, God commands them to bind his words as a sign on their hands and between their eyes. Tyler, you mentioned a chip on the hand or forehead, but centuries before Revelation, God claimed those exact physical spaces. The hand represents your actions and labor. The forehead represents your mind, thoughts, and identity. Wearing those words on the hand and head was supposed to mean your entire day-to-day life was marked by allegiance to God. The room was completely silent now as the pieces began to click together, and David guided them into the prophetic books to show how the internal reality became an external seal. Now look at Ezekiel chapter 9, where Jerusalem is facing judgment. Ezekiel sees a heavenly scribe with an inkhorn, told to go through the city and put a mark on the foreheads of the people who are genuinely grieving over the corruption. In the original Paleo-Hebrew that Ezekiel wrote in, the word for mark is literally the final letter of the alphabet, tav. Back then, a tav was drawn as a simple cross mark, a symbol shepherds used to brand their sheep. It was a literal signature of ownership on the forehead that told the executioners, "This one belongs to the master. Do not touch them." Even in the New Testament, before John writes Revelation, this motif shows up in the grit of real life, David said, leaning back and looking around the circle to bridge the gap to the New Covenant. In Galatians chapter 6, the Apostle Paul says, "I bear on my body the marks of Jesus." The Greek word he uses is stigmata. which referred specifically to the physical brands burned into Roman slaves or soldiers to show who owned them. Paul is saying his physical scars from persecutions are his literal tav, his branding of belonging to a master who protects his soul, even if his body breaks. David finally brought them back to the open pages of Revelation 13, the climax of the theme where the counterfeit is finally unmasked. So when we look at the beast's mark, what is it really? David asked gently, looking at Tyler. Then back to Arthur and Helen. The beast isn't inventing a new tracking system. He is creating a dark, economic parody of God's entire leitmotif. God marks his people on the forehead with ink and blood for spiritual alignment and safety, but the beast uses state coercion and branding on the hand and forehead to force people into an oppressive economic machine. It's a counterfeit Shema, demanding your labor and your thoughts just to participate in a broken system. It's not about a piece of technology we need to fear. It's about a total surrender of allegiance that has been playing out since the dawn of time.